let me quickly say this is the Incubation Jamstack Incubation Engineering update for this week. I'm glad you all joined. I think this is the biggest audience for this update yet. So I'm going to talk about two things that I did this week. One is the onboarding complete state update, which is necessary for the onboarding using the pipeline wizard for GitLab Pages onboarding. And the other is another smaller feature for GitLab Pages that I had been working on previously that I picked up again this week because I had a new idea. But one after the other, I'm gonna start with what I did first this week, which is the onboarding state. So here's my screen. You see, this is the GraphQL interface for GitLab. And basically what I did was adding a new mutation, which basically allows me to set pages marked onboarding complete input for a full for project path. And this is a project that I have access to, which I am the owner of. Root next, for example. So basically what I'm doing here is I can now, from the front end, mark a tick box. Yes, the onboarding is complete. This is working fine now. And now the backend has this information that the onboarding is complete. It's really, really simple, but it needs another database column. And I explained it last week why I need this, because right after submitting the new GitLab Pages, GitLab CI YAML file that should deploy GitLab Pages at some point, we're triggering a job, but it will take until this job is successfully finished first for us to have that information that the user has deployed a page or that there is any instance of any interaction with GitLab Pages. So between that time where the user committed this GitLab CI YAML file for the first time until the first Pages instance is successfully deployed, we're kind of in a limbo where the user interface has no information whether or not we should show this onboarding screen again. So this should solve that issue, because now we can just, once the user clicks commit for the first time, we can just submit this mutation and thus prevent this onboarding screen from being shown again. Shri has a question.
Hey, so the minute I commit the pipeline, why don't I rely on the pipeline source itself as the state management? So like, I have a YAML file. Oh, because I could be committing it in any branch and not just the master branch. So is that right?
Yes, you could be committing into the wrong branch. You could be, you could potentially submit an invalid file that doesn't create a pipeline just yet, because I'm giving you the option to interactively change the contents of the GitLab CI YAML file, so it could be invalid, but it will still accept the commit. So there's all those kinds of different reasons. The pipeline just doesn't 100% overlap with what I'm trying to do here. So this is basically just an information. Have I shown you this this screen before and have you walked completely through it. There will be another way of accessing, I'm imagining another way of accessing this whole onboarding screen again. But after you've completed it once, which is what I'm signifying with this toggle, after you've submitted it once, it will be hidden behind a second step where you can say, please show me the onboarding wizard again. Probably with a bit of text on the button, but basically this. So I can show you an in-between screen like, yes, you have already configured your GitLab CI YAML file, but the pipeline is not deployed yet. Here's a list of things you can check or list of things you can do if it doesn't work.
Yeah, thanks. Makes sense.
Right.
So where is this mutation stored?
This mutation, basically, I have not prepared. This mutation.
Hey, by the way, if I'm derailing the recording, we can just do your recording first and I can ask all these questions later. So
No, it's fine. I can cut them a bit shorter if needed. So this mutation is stored in the table project pages metadata, where I'm adding a new column onboarding complete, which is basically a toggle. Initially, this onboarding complete column will have all the values from deployed. So we're assuming that if a page is already deployed, that onboarding is complete, so that somebody doesn't need the onboarding screen anymore. So I'm filling these initially with the same values as onboarding complete during the migration, and eventually deployed and onboarding complete for a project that has been in existence for a little while. Those values should align unless the pages deployment went awry, went wrong, or something's up with a pipeline, in which case those two values can differ, but there should be some kind of eventual consistency.
yeah, nice. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. I mean, yeah, here we have a case where onboarding is complete, but the page is not deployed, which can happen if somebody walks through the onboarding, but then removes the page's deployment afterwards. So yeah, those don't 100% align, which is why I need this new column. Right, then there was a different thing that I have been working on this week, which is basically just the result of a shower thought. A couple of months ago, I opened this MR, add onboarding complete. No, sorry, this is the one I've been working on. Enable the usage of any artifact folder name. This is an MR on GitLab Pages, like the Go process that delivers GitLab Pages. Why is this important? Because currently, if you want to deploy anything with Pages, your public files that you want to have Pages delivered to the public needs to be in a folder called public, which is the behavior we probably copied from GitHub Pages. And it makes sense if you have a simple setup, but it's an additional complication for any other static site generator, because most of the static site generators have some kind of output folder, but each of them calls them differently. So, I mean, Hugo, Gatsby, and Svelte do use a folder called public, where they dump the compiled files in. React, on the other hand, as the biggest framework out there, uses a folder called build. Vue.js, Nuxt.js, Angular, Astro, and Vite use a folder called dist by default. Next.js uses out, and the currently very popular 11t uses _site, and so does Jekyll. All these frameworks can be configured to use a different folder. That's not the issue, and I think that has been how most of our clients have solved this issue. But it's an inconvenience, you know, it's not the most straightforward thing, because not only do you need to change the name of the output folder, many of those frameworks also use a folder called public for something else, like for static assets or anything else. So you have to rename that one too. And looking through the GitLab Pages code, there's no real reason why we would have this requirement, why this folder actually needs to be named public, other than the fact that it has always been that way. So I'm trying to just get rid of this requirement entirely. I'm playing through different ways of doing this. So my initial MR was like changing GitLab Pages in a way that it allows basically any folder. So the original thing was, I will deliver if there's only one folder in your artifacts, just deliver that as the root. Assume that is the root. If it's called public, I don't care. If it's called dist, I don't care. So the only thing where it was a bit difficult was if that artifacts folder contained more than one root folder. Like, what if it has a folder called public and a folder called dist? Which one is then the root? So I had this guess public directory name function, which would always return the single folder if there was just one root directory. And other than that, if in doubt, it would just go through the most popular names ordered by most popular to less popular frameworks. So if it found a folder called public and a folder called build, it would go for public. If it found a folder called dist and a folder called site, it would go for dist. Which I think is probably rather elegant because it doesn't need a lot of overhead on the part of the user. But there's a little bit of a back and forth because all this guessing happens when the user makes a request to GitLab Pages. And that is a bit, that's a lot of overhead. So this week I thought, how about we move this whole guessing to the job that deploys the GitLab Pages in Rails as a Rails background job. And let's open that zip file, rename the root folder to public, and then leave Pages, the GitLab Pages process as is. Or a third approach, which I mentioned here as a comment because it's just pseudocode at the moment. The idea was to just allow multiple folders and then don't use any root directory at all. But that I just realized while trying that out that the artifacts, even if I say this like a blob pattern, anything in the dist folder will still keep their root directory in the path. So this would still need some extra work on the Rails side in order to make this work, but it would also be very elegant because allowing this would allow the user to skip the compilation of static assets, so they could provide multiple folders, like dist for the compiled files and static for all static assets, and each of them would be used as the root. Shri has a question again.
My life is full of questions. Yeah. Yeah. So regarding option 1, where we assume, so if only one folder exists in the artifact, we just assume that is the root. I know, like asking the user to explicitly mention the public folder is not the most elegant, but assuming something is public could have a lot of security implications in terms of, I know I worked with a few people, or quite a few people, who are our customers or prospects, and they're pretty sloppy in what goes into an artifact. So many times you see like the Git folder itself, the .git folder as part of an artifact. So what would be your, let's say, how would you know that when you make this assumption of a folder, like, are you going to check if it contains static assets, or are you just going to assume that the only folder that exists has to be the root?
The assumption is if there's only one root folder,
regardless of content,
in the artifacts, regardless of what it's called, that would be the root folder.
I mean, the very basic thing we could do is like try to see if it is a hidden folder or not. If it is a hidden folder, then don't make this assumption. So if it is a .git folder or something like that.
That is a very good idea. Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know, but like in my opinion, if something becomes public by default, then I'd rather have the customer explicitly say that they want to do this rather than, so maybe you can check if the pages are private or are they exposed to everyone before you want to apply this rule.
Yes, well, the thing is that pages still needs to be configured as a job. So somebody has to have gone in and say pages, artifacts, paths, and just define this one folder as the public one. And only if that is in there,
you'll be surprised how many things you can
build dist out or side folders would actually be additionally exposed if we have multiple folders right now. But yes, the fact.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm not saying my recommendation is the perfect way to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are some nuances around it that you have to, like, I mean, if you go through security review, probably they'll mention more scenarios which I failed to mention. But just assuming something has to be public for the user, I know they have to still define the YAML, but we are making it really easy for them to define it in the YAML through the wizard.
Yeah.
People can be sloppy, so we have to be careful.
Yeah. So yeah, there was another idea, which is adding another item to the GitLab CI YAML, the property that specifies please use this folder as root. But I'm always a bit careful with adding more requirements to that file, because as a user, I would assume that specifying this as an artifact under the pages stage or job would already be that.
Yeah, maybe if we can make it more explicit in the YAML definition. So if instead of artifact paths, we said pages, public, and then they give the path, then at least they know that then the user is explicitly saying that this folder is going to be exposed.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm just like this contract, like, hey GitLab, why did you expose my secrets? It should be very clear. Hey user, because you defined it here, not because I made an assumption. So I don't know if I'm wearing the legal hat or being defensive, but like purely like you, the user, have done something explicitly, which makes this exposed to the world.
Yeah. That's a good feedback. Yeah, I'll definitely count that in. And yes, I haven't made any decision yet. I've just tried those different approaches and am weighing them against each other. But yes, the ultimate goal is with as little overhead for the user as possible, and with as little going into and reading documentation stuff as possible, enable those additional folders.
No, makes sense.
But
It
not
makes absolute
without
sense.
surprising them. Yeah, I don't want to negatively surprise them.
Yeah. No, I mean, the underlying idea makes sense, right? There are all these different frameworks. Every framework has, let's say, a different folder name. Maybe I don't know, this is probably a bad idea, but we just try to pick the biggest frameworks and support their particular folder names. That's an easy way out. I like the idea. It's really clean, right? I mean, if there's only one folder, then that obviously has got to be the root. Makes sense, but there are like a different kind of
what I'm thinking now is just introducing another property like that behaves exactly like artifacts paths, but it's just named differently, so as to you go actively in, and then we can have both behaviors parallel. Artifact paths will only
I love that. Yeah,
public.
Like I love that explicit key that says public, and then you give the path. So makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Publish.
Publish. Yeah.
Publish. Right. Thank you. This was good feedback. That was great.